Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Boston Town Deal Board meeting. Thank you very much for attending this afternoon. Hopefully everybody's had all the minutes from Louisa with the packs. So we'll crack straight on. Louisa, could you give me list for absence, please?
Alice Olson from Metzlerwood, Kingsley Taylor from Citizens Advice, Peter Isaac from Aldred's, Councillor Eddie Pole from Lincolnshire County Council, and Warren Peppard from Lincolnshire County Council.
Any other apologies that anybody knows of? No, that's fine. Go on to item number 2 on the agenda then. That's to take the minutes of the Boston Town Deal Board meeting held on the 10th of September 2020. Now, I don't intend to go through the detail unless anybody wants me to, but has there anybody got any comments or observations on those minutes or any amendments anybody would like to make? Can't see any hands, so can I have a proposer, please, for those minutes? Councillor Paul Skinner, and a seconder. Andy Lawrence. Seconder. I nearly called you Jack there, Andy, but Andy Lawrence. Thank you very much. So we'll take those minutes as read. So we'll go on to the minutes of the technical subgroup meeting held on the 21st of September 2020. Again, everybody's had copies of those minutes within your packs. Has anybody got any comments, observations, amendments that they would like to see to those? Or is everybody happy with those? In which case, can I ask for a proposer from somebody who was present at those meetings, or that meeting? Councillor Councillor Paul Skinner was proposing, and Simon Beardsley was seconding those. Thank you very much. So we'll move on now to the draft town investment plan. Again, you will have got copies of this within your pack. There was an initial draft sent out earlier last week in order for people to try to familiarise themselves with where we were with things, given the amount of information that we wanted to ensure people had access to, and a slightly revised version came out on Friday within the packs. I'll hand over to Ivan, I think, in a second to maybe talk us through where we are with the town investment plan. I know that we had some feedback. The check and challenge process through Arab was initiated and done last week, so we've had some feedback from the initial tip that was produced. So maybe if Ivan could sort of update us on where we are with that, where we are with the feedback, and then we'll open it up to the floor in terms of anybody's got any questions or observations on that. So, Ivan.
Thank you very much, Neil. Good morning, everyone. Oh, good afternoon, even. In the pack, this document comes immediately after the minutes, and it's quite a long document. It's set out in a visual way. And it's the first draft of what ultimately we will submit at the end of October, on the 30th of October, because the 31st is a Saturday. It's written to a particular format which takes you through the key things that the people scoring the tip will look at. And the way they score it is to do a read of the whole document, and then as long as they're satisfied that that whole document broadly follows what they're expecting in terms of the guidance, they'll then go through and look at each individual section. So because we wanted to demonstrate our confidence and enthusiasm, we rather than just sending in a Word document, we did put it into this format, and there was a lot of hard work right up to the wire to get it into this positive presentational format that was pursued, and I think that played well for us, because we got some very positive comments back from the reviewing of this, although also a number of things that we needed to pick up on going forward. Now, I don't intend to take you slavishly through this document, but just to give you a flavour of the way it flows and what's in there. So we started by setting out our vision, which had been agreed previously at the board. We then put in some information about COVID, because it's absolutely clear in the guidance that it's paramount that these bids now are able to COVID-proof the settlements in which they're based. And interestingly, in terms of COVID and the numbers, Boston has fared slightly less badly than some other areas. But the thing that I think is absolutely key is not that we might have done slightly better in terms of the number of jobs at risk compared to, say, Skegness, but that actually that the stats tell us that there are over 7,000 people who are at serious risk of losing their job. And in relative terms, that would be bad news wherever you were at any time. So we make that point, and we reference one or two other things that have happened locally on the ground that just show how the impact of COVID is tracking through to things like the high street offer. And then we talk around opportunity and need. And again, you've seen the transformation plan that we prepared earlier, which takes each of the different key themes that are challenges in relation to the economy of Boston and says what we're going to do about them. And we corralled those themes under three broad headings. One was around skills and aspirations. The second was around sustainable economic growth. And the third was around what we call pride of place. And we set our stall out in terms of our town investment plan against those three key themes. We then talk through the key projects that are assembled under each of those different themes in some detail. So in terms of skills and aspirations, we've got this landmark project, the Mayflower Center, which has been developed by Claire and her team. We've also got the Holy Trinity Initiative, and we talk about how they will have an impact on really starting to drive up the skills achievements in Boston. And interestingly, Boston is, you know, and I don't say this in any but a kind of realistic way, virtually right at the bottom when you benchmark the settlements in England, the local authorities against each other through something called the English Indices of Deprivation. Boston has got some real challenges, so it's important that we make and recognise that as a core part of the plan. And then in the sustainable economic growth bit, we talked about a number of things, but at the heart of that was really this emerging project around the port, which brings together the University of Lincoln, Boston College and the port, and really builds the strength around Boston's role as a logistics gateway. But we also referenced some other things there, like the proposals for Endeavour FM and the proposed investment in Boston Railway Station. And then we got the third package, which is under pride of place. And that really surfaces the fact that, to quote Michael Caine, not a lot of people know this, but Boston has got a world-class heritage cluster. And we talk there about how that can really be used to drive the place shaping agenda and the key projects that have come together around that, ranging from the church lighting scheme at St Botolph's down to Shod Friars Townscape Heritage Project. So we set out, I think, a very compelling offer corralled around those three big themes that come off the vision. We then showed how they all connected up through a project framework and the interconnectivities amongst them. And then we talked a bit about how we would be building on what was already happening as well, to make sure that those things all fitted together strategically. And we talked about how they aligned with national policy, regional policy, and local policy, picking out key things like the local plan, destination management plan for Greater Lincolnshire, the LEPS industrial strategy. And then we moved on to talk about how those projects related to clean growth, because in addition to COVID, clean growth is the big thing that we have to show that we're relating to. And we've got a grid in there that shows 4 key components that make up clean growth and how each of the projects that are in the proposal relate to those. And then we ranked the projects, and we ranked those projects using a tool that's been developed by the Towns Fund itself. And I think that was quite powerful. We explained that there's actually a glitch in the tool that means it undervalues when you put the scores in, and I won't go into all the detail, the town specific criteria. And Lydia has managed to fix that fault in the spreadsheet. So when we rerun these figures, it will represent what we've put in. But because it treated each project equally, we didn't try and worry too much about fixing it before this went in the tight timescale we've got, because it still gave a true ranking, because everybody had the same issue in the way the ranking worked in the spreadsheet. But so we produced a ranking which put at the top Boston Port and then the Heritage Cluster, and it worked all the way through to the bottom, and the project that was last but by no means least was the proposals for the Black Sluice moorings. We then talked about making sure that these projects all aligned with other things that were happening that we'd reviewed in the strategies. And we then basically unpicked each project in a bit more detail to show what its key components were. And that's quite a long bit that we're going to shorten for the purposes of the final document that goes in. And then at the very end, we talked about the partnerships that had underpinned what we'd done. And you know, the work around My Town, which had generated a huge amount of interest, the work around the board, the work around the technical subgroup. And so that then formed our first draft of the whole tip. Because the people who are assessing this tip are also assessing Skegness and Mablethorpe, we had this marathon session last Monday, which lasted for thick end of 4 hours, with a group of, believe it or not, 9 technical experts that were assembled to go through all of that and pick the bones out of it. You may be under or overwhelmed depending on your experience of these things. I was actually over rather than underwhelmed that their comments came down to ultimately the slide that we've attached as the first bit of the report directly after the PDF. And in there, you'll see that there were effectively 3, 6, 8 points they raised about Boston. They liked the fact that we'd picked out those key themes, but they wanted us to go into even more detail about the Boston flavour of them. They liked, and what we're going to do around that is get some little word bubbles with some narratives, and we've been talking this very day, stimulated by Claire, about this whole notion of social mobility being a key aspect that we can weave into there. So they wanted some more stories. They thought that it would be good to see a bit more detail of the theory of change underpinning each of the projects, and we're going to work with the project sponsors to pull that out. And what they mean by that is just a bit more detail about the journey they'll go on to get to the outputs that they've said they'll achieve. They wanted us just to tidy up some of the wording so it was consistent all the way through. And that was just a function of us not having as much time as we might have liked to get this in, because they only really gave us effectively a week. They liked the Holy Trinity initiative, but they'd like some more information on its targets, which we're addressing at the moment. It says few interventions that do target. It should have said a few interventions target. So they're not saying there are too few, they're actually saying we should give them more prominence. And this is quite interesting, because I think there's a balance between what we might describe as social economy, inclusive growth things, and then things that are traditionally seen as driving on the economy from a macro point of view. And we've been a bit careful not to put those social projects too much to the front. I still don't think they want them right up front and centre, but they'd like to see them given a decent amount of emphasis, which is fine. We'll respond to that. Andy and Val will be pleased to know, they said the port development sounds very interesting. And then they asked this throwaway question, what's the current economic activity at the port? So we just need to have a discussion to get that information for them. But they did think that the Centre for Food and Fresh Produce Logistics was a real signature thing, and we should perhaps reference it higher up in the document. And then they wanted to know a bit more about PE21 to get a better sense of scale. And you'll note that as we go through and talk about the other papers, really all of this now, in many senses, comes down to agreeing how we reconcile PE21 and the aspirations for that and the Mayflower Center. Not exclusively, but I think they were driving at a bit of that in the way that they gave us that feedback. So what we're now doing is addressing those things that I mentioned previously. There's a little Gantt chart underneath the PDF that shows what we're doing around that and the timescales. And we've already had a discussion at the technical group just to take people through the ranking and the issues that arose from all of that. So we've got a clear run-in now to refine this. We've got some clear, useful feedback, which again is good, because quite often in the world of bidding, you put your bid in and you hear nothing then until you get something back that says, yes, you've done well, you've been successful, or no, you've not done very well and you're not going to get the money. So this is good, because even though it was painful and long, it's really given us, it's set our compass now for moving forward to finish the thing off. There's a lot in what I've just said there, Neil, for which apologies. I've spoken for about 15 minutes and I don't mean to take up too much of people's time, but I hope I've set the scene there then for the discussion about the tip and board members' views of it that can help us. And then the next bit of the process will really be getting into the nub of talking through the relative merits of the projects in terms of not starting from scratch. And please don't anybody introduce a big new project at this stage, because we might just explode if you do that. But really talking through what we do now to bring this home in terms of the final ranking and assembly of the projects. So, but before we get into that, I hope that's sort of set the scene for people about where we are and giving you a sense of, that next push we need to achieve with your guidance and mandate today to get on then and over the next couple of weeks, finish this off and get it in. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Ivan. It's really useful. I think it's really useful, as you say, to get the feedback from Arab in terms of on the initial draft. It really gives us an idea of maybe where we can strengthen, maybe where we can plug any gaps that there are. I'm going to open it up to the floor now, to the board members for any comments or questions. I think we've obviously got one of the next items on the agenda is all to do with project progress. So I think the initial part of the discussion maybe needs to revolve around the actual the tip itself and the narrative that it's trying to put across, and see if there's any questions particularly on that, and then we can leave detailed discussions about the projects maybe to the latter part, albeit that there's bound to be some overlap. I appreciate that, but this initial part I think is all about the feedback the initial draft town investment plan that we've got, the feedback we've got from Arab, and whether the board are happy in the direction that is going, and then we can have a more detailed discussion about projects following on from that. So has anybody got any questions that they want to raise, either by raising their hands, or if you want to go through the raising your hands?
Matthew's raised his hand, Neil.
Matthew, I see you've raised your hand if you would like to ask a question or make a comment.
Okay, thank you. So actually, it's not a question, it's just a bit of feedback. And I read this over the weekend and I think it is an absolutely outstanding document. The detail that goes into it, the coherence of argument, the persuasive language that's used. And if this has seriously taken a week to put together, Ivan, and the team that you've worked with, really, I take my hat off to you and say congratulations, because it is an outstanding piece of work. And I can only hope that Boston goes through as being one of the key players at the top of the list. And if it isn't, then I have to turn around and say, my suspicion is there would have been little more that we could have done to have secured the funding. So I've said enough. I just want to say well done, an outstanding piece of work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we should probably end the meeting there, Neil.
No, I think we'll carry on, Ivan. It'll get tougher. Don't worry.
I'm sure.
Nick Warboys, you've got your hand raised, Nick.
Yeah, so only just a quick one, just to obviously mirror what Matthew said. There's a lot of work gone into this. I suppose the next stage, Neil, is what you just said, what we're coming on to, how we're going to hone this down to make these decisions. So there's an awful lot there. There's a lot of money going into that. And it's a case, I suppose, as a board member, the next steps and to get all the information to know what we can actually take forward. Certainly when we've got two £15 million projects in there, that's quite concerning to get the level of detail as to what we support. But just really from the GLEP perspective, one of the things I've just noted, it doesn't reflect the now changed boundaries in terms of the greater Lincolnshire, including North and North East links. It's got Boston as the second biggest town. I don't know if we want to reflect the, obviously now the geography and the fact that that's changed.
If you wanted me to respond to that, Neil, I mean, my view would be that perhaps we ought to make it clear we're talking about the administrative county of Lincolnshire, because I think it's a real strength to be able to talk about as being the second largest settlement, which we are within the administrative county. And so I take people's views on it, but I still think personally as well that the way the economy works, whilst we've got a template that goes from the Humber to the Wash, those two settlements in the north and northeast Lincolnshire are very different in character and perhaps don't directly impact in terms of their functioning economic geographies on Boston very much. But I'd be advised by the board.
I think I tend to agree with you, Ivan. I think it's a strength to say we're the second largest, aren't we? I think as long as we're clear, and my view is as long as we're clear with the terminology, that we're not ignoring. We're obviously trying to work closely with the GLEP. We're strategic partners with them, but I think it enhances it if we emphasise the importance of Boston, as that sub-regional centre, and factually that's the correct statement to make, isn't it? Albeit we could expand it and with the GLEP. Has anybody else got any views on that from the board? I don't want to just be my view against others. Nick, do you want to come back on that at all? Or?
No, I don't disagree with you at all, Neil. I think it's just the fact that obviously we're saying the GLEP, and then obviously the fact is now the geography has officially changed. So whether we do, to put it as the second largest town and refer to the GLEP, as I say, it's just that little bit of contradiction in terms.
Yeah, I think that's why I was saying that as long as our terminology is correct in terms of, then I think it's important. We don't want to ignore the GLEP. We want to work with them. But Michelle, I don't know whether you want to come in on that.
Thank you, Neil. I tend to agree. I take Nick's point around the terminology. I think the preference should be that Boston is the second largest urban area within the administrative county of Lincolnshire, because obviously there could be seen to be competing needs between the settlements, particularly as this is now a competitive process. I think it's really clear when we first had Townsdeal launched, it was clearly, the message was it was not a competitive process, but it very much is a competitive process now. And I think it's about preserving and strengthening Boston's position in the economy. And just coming back to some data, I was on a separate meeting this morning with Andy Lawrence and Val, where we were talking about the level of investment that's been within the greater Lincolnshire area, but actually specifically from private sector in the southeast Lincolnshire. And I've just done an email to say that's great to get that into the tip as well, because it emphasises the economic powerhouse that Boston should play in the southeast of the county. So I think that would be my suggestion, Neil.
Is everybody happy with that as a way forward? Okay, so we'll incorporate that within the tip. Has anybody else got any comments with regard to the draft tip and where we are with it? Andy, that's your hand raised, I believe.
Sorry, I'm working off two computers, sorry. In the project framework, it mentions train or tram lines and road, also specific sector-specific technology. I think that perhaps the port ought to be considered being those three boxes.
Well, I'm absolutely happy to put it in there. I mean, if we're able to demonstrate, which I'm sure, because you're saying that we are, that we're going to be using some towns fund money specifically on those activities, then yeah, we'll make sure that's covered off, Andy.
Yeah. Can I just say then, at this point, we probably need to have a little discussion about that. And the sort of relation to the skills element. That's fine to show the link. It's just we have to make sure that there was no thoughts that there was a capital investment in that particular piece of infrastructure.
Yeah, well, that's why I left it out, Val, because I wasn't sure that we were actually going to be using towns fund money directly for those things.
No, I think what we're doing is we're using the towns fund money to catalyse investment in those things.
Yeah.
But the project itself, the starter project, doesn't have capital investment in the port significant of any value other than some digital technologies of use.
Yeah. Yeah. So and this bit is directly doing those things rather than indirectly. So I think we can strengthen the text and the description of what's happening without necessarily filling that table in that way.
Yeah, I agree.
With that, Andy.
Yeah, no, I agree. Thanks for the conversation. I agree.
Anybody else got any comments on that before we move on? Okay, I think, I mean, given the time that people have had to sort of review the tip, I think it's probably fair to say that if people do have sort of other minor comments that they want to make, they can make through to the team before we finalise the tip. There may be small elements that they want to just clarify, to make any comments, then by all means do, and we can, the final tip will obviously come forward at the next board meeting. I think it's the 16th of October, isn't it? Is the final board meeting when we'll approve this. Is that right, Louisa?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So yeah, if anybody has got any other comments that they want to make, then they can do to the team. Okay. We'll move on then to the agenda item 5, which is the sort of next stage of development. And I guess Ivan sort of touched on this, but it starts to move us towards the sort of the crux of the issues, really, in terms of the project or how we're going to actually finalise the bid. So Ivan, do you want to sort of comment on that? I don't know whether you, in terms of the next stage of development, you actually want to move on to the project progress element, do you? Because the two sort of start to combine, don't they? I think, if I'm reading your paper correctly.
Yeah, if I could do that, that would be great. And this is a movable feast because, it's being updated in the light of intelligence all the time. But in this section of the report, we talk about where we are with each different aspect. Pardon me. And the tourism and heritage work, we really now, I think, are confident that cluster of projects, St Botolph's Church Lighting Scheme, St Botolph's Medieval Library, Blenheim Memorial Hall, the Townscape Heritage proposals that have been put forward through Heritage Lincolnshire, and they've been put together now. They're called Healing the High Street, Townscape Heritage and Wide Bargate Shopfront, and the Shodfriars work. we're confident that they will all pass muster and that they can all progress within the timescales. And you'll see in a minute when I come and talk about the ranking that they all feature as credible, good quality projects. We've got a bit more information now back about the Black Sluice moorings, and again, I'm quite positive potentially that we could include that. It's certainly there as a runner and rider now. We need a bit more information back from the Centenary Methodist Church, and I've been talking to Sharon Warner, who's part of the team, about working with them, because there is still just about enough time to pull their information into a pro forma. But apart from the fact that Black Sluice is coming to us in detail at least a bit late, and there's a bit more work needed for Centenary Methodist Church, I think that cluster, we're very confident now that we can proceed with that. Around skills and enterprise, Mayflower Center is a fabulous project, and really it sits at the heart of the whole issue. The issue we've got with the Mayflower Center and with PE21 is that they're both costed in at the moment as 15 million, and that if you just did those two projects on their own, that would take us 5 million over the 25 that's available to us. So the real issue there is about how those two projects, particularly, I think, which are linked, because you can't really hand over the Jeff Mulder Centre, which is the site of the Mayflower, until you've got a clear vision for another sports centre in Boston. And Councillor Goodale was saying last time, really you wouldn't want to be closing the Mayflower, the Jeff Mulder down until you'd got something new for people to have instead. So it's really, that is a great project, and I think it still sits at the heart of what we're seeking to achieve. People in the check and challenge, the external experts, really liked it. They thought it was aspirational and dynamic, but we've just got that issue really, which will probably be at the nub of the discussion we have in a little while, about how we reconcile the challenges around that and PE21. The port and logistics piece is seen really as being something that everybody would expect to be part of the Boston approach. I'm confident that that can all fit together, without wanting to embarrass Val. I've yet to come across something she's been involved in that hasn't been delivered well and on time. So I think we're very confident that can go forward. The regeneration cluster, Smarter Homes, is a really interesting project, although there may be some issues about the fact that it's a pilot and therefore doesn't bring any match funding with it, but it's a small project and it's really interesting in what it's seeking to do. We decided after a discussion that Quadrant 2 probably wasn't quite sufficiently ready for where we are now in terms of the town fund, so that's come off the list for now. In terms of connectivity, the Boston transport strategy work is going to run. It's only a small piece of work in the end when we've looked at it without Towns Fund support, but we can still align to it. The station enhancements, the East Midlands Railway station enhancement is fabulous. It's a really, really good repurposing of the railway station. It's a real commitment by East Midlands Rail. They could have invested in about a dozen to 15, 16 different Towns Fund places, and they're only looking at investing on that line in Boston and Skegness. And our station is listed, and they're in a dialogue on the back of that. Clive will be pleased to know, with the Railway Heritage Trust as well, because of the importance of it as a facility. And then you've got Endeavour FM, which is a bit different, which is an interesting project, and again, I think can proceed quite credibly. So that cluster of things around connectivity, straightforward. And then in terms of inclusive growth, all the key projects there, apart from the Advice to the People of Boston CAB project, which I've still to talk to Kingsley about, but which might be able to be accommodated in some small revenue form through where we are, because we've got a bit of flexibility over the revenue side of things, is also that list is also deliverable. So we've now got to a situation, and we haven't got there easily. You know, there's been quite a long process going right back to just after Christmas, where we started with 82 different projects, and we've now got a pretty refined set of projects. And when we scored them all, this is the ranking they came out in. At the time we did this first ranking here, we hadn't got the port in, but we've now been able to include the port, as I showed in the actual bid we put in. This is a slightly earlier listing. And if you take all the projects minus the two, the PE21 and Mayflower, they come in at 10 million. So effectively, we are in a position where if we can reconcile those two projects, everything else that we've got on this list could be put in as part of our bid and would come in just within the envelope of the funding we're after. That also would leave us with scope, because again, we'd not got the information until the 11th hour in sending in the tip bid for checking by the check and challenge process. But within there is also scope to include the Holy Trinity project in that list, and also the project which is associated with that, and with the Mayflower Center, which is the Lincolnshire Ambassador projects that David and his team at the CVS have put together. And we could squeeze all that together to put in that compelling list of activities, themed as we've set them out in the tip, subject to us being clear on how we're going to manage this overbid situation between the Mayflower Center and the PE21. Now, if we were King Solomon, I suppose what we'd do is just cut them in half, and so we can have 7.5 million each. I'm sure life isn't as simple as that. But to me, you know, it's really about how we reconcile those two projects with everything else, rather than trying to work out the relative merit of all the other things. Because when we've scored them and looked at them, everything that's in play at the moment fits. And if we can find a way of accommodating the cost of those two big projects, we can have our cake and eat it. If we can't, then we need to go back to the drawing board a bit. But that in essence is where we are, and I guess that's at the nub of the key issues that the board needs to really take a view on, Neil.
Okay, thank you, Ivan. I don't know if we've had any, I don't know if I'll probably ask Michelle this question. I don't know if there's been any further sort of discussion or progress with regard to the deliverability, I suppose, of those projects, the Boston College project and the Mayflower Center and the PE21 project, in terms of a reduced ask from the 15 million for each of those projects, because I guess that's sort of one of the keys to the board understanding you know, where we are and how we can go forward. Has there been any further discussion or progress on that, Michelle?
Thank you, Neil. I'm going to have to step to Lydia, because Lydia's got the update on those projects, certainly in respect of P21, and obviously Claire's on the meeting in terms of the Mayflower as well. I think one of the things there is well, let Lydia go, and then I'll come in at the end of that. Thank you, Neil.
Apologies, Michelle. Lydia, maybe if you could take that one from the PE21 perspective.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, we are approaching both the PE21 and Mayflower as a joined up project, as Ivan described. So the Mayflower Center is very much at the heart of PE21. The accelerator funding, as you're probably aware, has supported a feasibility study into a and there has been 3 key pieces of work that have been commissioned around that. So a organisation is looking at the assessment of the current ownership of buildings and land within PE21. We have another organisation that is looking at the development of a leisure centre that is complementary to the health centre, which has been done in conjunction with the Lincolnshire Clinical Commissioning Group. And then lastly, our kind of master planning colleagues, HETA, have been commissioned to pull all that together, and they've been particularly asked to look at and reflect kind of the changes in the marketplace to ensure that we're not detracting away from the town centre, but enhancing and stimulating the town centre. There's been consideration, obviously, as Ivan has already alluded to the importance of the leisure provision. And colleagues have also met with Bry Lane Travel in relation to the location of the bus centre as well. In relation to your specific inquiry, I have touched base with those 3 consultants, and they are still working on the development of the costings around that. So at this point in time, I don't have an update on the costings that would be really helpful. I don't know if it's worth bringing in Claire as well to see how the Mayflower project is shaping up as well at this point, or if anybody's got any questions either.
Yeah, we'll perhaps let Claire speak first, and then we can open it up to the floor in terms of sort of where we are.
Thanks, Lydia. As you said, obviously this is intrinsically linked to PE21 in terms of the Mayflower building. I've met with Michelle and shared some of the early visuals that our architects have done as part of that scoping exercise to see essentially what we can get in that space, what that could look like to make sure that it is evidently a community piece of work and that it's open to business and enterprise. And Chair, would you be happy for me to try and share my screen in an act of amazing technical wizardry?
That would be fine. I would fail miserably, but Claire, I'm sure you'll be able to.
We'll see. Nobody hold the breath. It might be a while. I just thought it might be useful, just if that's okay, Michelle, for us to share those images, just so you can sort of see the scale that's proposed currently.
I think that's a great idea.
So if Louisa, you could give me that option, please.
Just doing that now, Claire.
Thank you.
Should be able to do that now.
Fab.
At the bottom, can you see where it says share screen? We'll do that.
Yeah. So this is a view of the site and the space within that. Can you all see that? Just somebody saying nod or whatever, because I can't see you now. Yeah. So just to locate people, this is Rowley Road. This is our Ingelo Centre here. It's obviously the Maud Foster drain. And the proposal would be to use this existing envelope of space to create, I'm not happy with this roof line, but essentially a very open atrium area with, if you could just see where my pointer is, this is conference and business startup units along this side, a restaurant in this corner, and then all this area to be open access to communities, including, for example, a retail shop and a space for volunteer services. And then along this arc here is, it would be animal management. So I can show you, I can flip to a plan of that ground floor. So forgetting the squares, the yellows are all around the public spaces, showcase hair and beauty salon, and a pet clinic or dog grooming, we're not quite sure. And then the kitchens that would facilitate the restaurant in this bow of the ship here. And then alongside here, the animal management areas. So some of this having open access to, again, to the public. But then this arc here, as I described, having all the red areas are business incubation units for small businesses starting up, a large conference area, and employability, classrooms and digital learning spaces at this end. So all of this essentially is focused towards business and enterprise. And then upstairs on a separate plan is the illustration of how the staff that we currently have who support businesses, employability and such like, would be on hand to ensure that people using this conference centre had access, as would many of the adults that we're proposing would come into this space, and improve their digital learning and access to digital literacy. So a very open, airy, tree-filled space that would give people the opportunity to walk through the doors of a college that might not already want, might not already do because of the barriers to learning that we know exist and will continue to exist. So now I can't unshare, so somebody might have to do that for me.
And Neil, if I may just follow on from Claire's point there around the barriers to learning, the vision for this project is to really unpick the issue that we have within Boston around that social mobility and around the access to learning. And if we look at our statistics, our ONS statistics, we see that for every level of qualification, NVQ 1, 2, 3, 4 and above, Boston not only performs below national average, but performs below regional county average as well. And there is something really fundamental for the future of our communities in terms of employment, particularly when we have regard to the, we often say in Boston that we're a very fortunate place because we have low unemployment. That is because the majority of our employment is found within agriculture and food manufacturing, which it's a moot point whether we describe them as low skilled, because those in the industry will say that our communities are the best skilled in the country, which is why they're here where they are. But in terms of those sectors, there is huge pressure in terms of the impact of robotics, automation and AI in terms of what the jobs look like now that are being carried out and what those jobs will look like in 5 or 10 years. Therefore, there is a huge amount of pressure on ensuring that the existing workforce can access learning and access learning freely in order to make sure that their skills level keep abreast of the changes to the skills level required in the industries in which they work. Then when you factor in the COVID situation in terms of the impact that's had on particularly hospitality industries, and then if you factor in our young people, and a statistic I particularly like is that it's something like 65% of all primary school children will do a job that is not yet invented. So when you then look to the impact of skills on our local area, and we then look at social mobility and all of the benefits that come through the ability to earn more, creates that impact of added economic average value to the household. There are many different studies that show that increases access to health, to access to advice, which therefore improves the overall well-being of our individuals within our community. The concept of the Mayflower Center really does sit along that narrative of the investment that's been made so far, not just in the college, but then bringing in the university and then bringing in our schools. And I think certainly Matthew and I have spoken about this, to ensure that a project such as this absolutely fully encompasses the schools as well. So we have that proper golden thread all the way through that really links back to aspiration, both for our young children and our adult learners. So that's why this is such an interesting project, and why for Boston it's a key project in terms of unlocking all of that potential within our employed workforce. It's back to our inclusive growth agenda. We want those that are not yet able to benefit from growth to be able to have the same opportunities. It does, I think, picking up Lydia's point, we haven't got that detail yet, board, around what the financial packages will look like, but I think that's where something board might want to consider, viewing those projects as two merged ones rather than two standalone. That the 12 months of business case development can really hone in on where that those financial support will come from, as well as making sure that we're capitalising, no pun there, on the revenue aspects that these projects will also bring in terms of match funding. And then I think there's another piece of work that we would want to unpick as well in terms of the business support for this. Claire's already done quite a lot of consultation with the business community in terms of their needs for this, and again has gained a lot of traction and support from the business community. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Claire, for that. Yes, it's really interesting to see, some visuals, initial visuals of that project, and I don't think there's going to be anybody necessarily on the board who won't agree that it's a potentially a fantastic project, as is the PE21 regeneration project, and they're both sort of transformational and could have a massive impact on the town. I guess the biggest issue that we've got from a board's perspective is sort of where we are with a limited pot of money. We've gone through this process. We've got a set of projects that have gone through the technical subgroup for around £10 million, which sort of have broadly got the support of have got the support of the technical subgroup, and need to get the confirmation from the main board. And then we've got these two sort of very big projects that would be the real showcases for us in terms of our town deal proposal, but have obviously got risks attached to them in terms of their delivery, but could be fantastic projects for the town if we can deliver them within the framework of the town deal bid that we need to put forward. So, I mean, with that as a context, I don't know if anybody wants to raise any questions or issues. I think, as I say, the big conundrum is how we fit those into an overall bid of 25 million. Councillor Goodale.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I mean, for me, the obvious solution to this is to split out the pool and the health centre from the PE21 project, and just have it as a standalone project which goes along with the Mayflower Center. I can't see another way forward with this if it's going to move along within this timescale. There are still a number of issues around PE21, and I think as my role as a member of Boston Council, I mean, I would hate to see the Mayflower Centre fail simply because we can't deliver another leisure suite, another pool, because at the end of the day, that needs to be done for the people of Boston. So I just think the obvious way forward is to split the health centre and the pool away from the PE21 project. I know it's part of it, it's in that area, but I think we need to split it away, and that way I believe we might or should be able to get them within the actual funding source that we have available. But that's just a view. Obviously, without seeing the figures, it is only that. But I say that's my view anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Goodale. I don't know if there's anything that Lydia or Michelle want to sort of come back on that in terms of how sort of feasible that is to start to split that project, or whether that's something that needs to be sort of considered over a longer time scale.
Shall we? I think probably if the board are happy for that as a suggestion, we've got this piece of work that with the various consultants, we can factor that in and ask them to consider that as part of that. It shouldn't take again, in terms of what they're currently doing, it's not too big an ask for that to be turned around fairly quickly in their current timescales. So we can take that as an action away and present that to the board on the 16th, if that's a helpful way forward.
Well, before we sort of conclude anything, we need to take sort of further comments from the board members. Jackie's got her hand up, so Jackie, would you like to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Just really asking Lydia around the timescales, because I haven't been contacted by any of the consultants yet, and clearly time is moving on, and if you need the sort of engagement of the CCG around the health centre, then I would have hoped that would be fairly soon.
Yes, thank you, Jackie. I've noted your comments and your email that I've received today. I will chase that for you because I think that's really imperative that we are following up on that as soon as possible. And I'll take that back along with any comments from this meeting as well as to how we're shaping those plans. I know there are different elements of PE21, and I'm not sure, might defer to Michelle at a moment in terms of how we either phase the development of these two critical projects, or how we maybe wrap them up into different development parcels. So to me, there's obviously the health and leisure, there's the Mayflower, there's the opportunity to how we develop PE21 to respond to the needs of the town. And then I can take all these comments back and make sure that they're fed into that process as quickly as possible, really over the next 7 to 10 days.
Thank you, Lydia. Neil, if I just can assist there as well. I think we were always clear that PE21 was always going to be a phased approach, because it's 10 acres and you can't, in all fairness, do 10 acres in one block, particularly with some of the issues around the potential to have to move different things around and which phases to bring forward. Certainly the complementary health and leisure aspect is something that we've always believed can come forward in a phased approach as an early phase 1, because of the land ownership for a start, in that health and the borough both own land within that 10 acres, and we therefore could work together with potential again private sector as well to deliver those as an outcome. So that's something for sure that we've thought. I think the other aspect that we want to really draw down is the opportunities for other external funding. So again, if you take the leisure centre, there's established principle that if you're, as a local authority, if we were building a leisure centre and required additional capital investment, that is something, one option may be to consider going to the market for a development partner who would then operate the leisure centre over a 25-year period. And in return for that 25-year period of operation, they would put a substantial chunk of capital into the project development. And that often is a mechanism of how you can bring forward capital. And there would be other funding streams as well that we would seek to exploit. And Lydia and I were speaking earlier on around how we would seek to maximise that. And indeed, that's a conversation Claire and I have had around using the time to understand and maximise where those additional funding streams may exist and how to present that compelling argument that these are projects that should be supported. I think there's, and on that's the importance really of where the town investment plan comes into play, because I think something going back to what Ivan had said earlier on, the interlinking of all the projects clearly provides a real holistic approach to what the town deal is seeking to do in terms of that levelling up the communities for Boston. And once we, again, referencing a port meeting I was on earlier today, pulling in the regional influence, the amount of investment, the number of jobs that are dependent, pulling all of that starts to create a far better and interesting opportunity for that private sector investment as well. So that's something that we're exploring as well. And I think that, as Lydia says, the next 7 to 10 days to get that updated tip and project plan to you for final sign off on the 16th is important. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Michelle. I think Councillor Skinner.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, for me, it's the health and well-being section of that. It's not just a swimming pool, it's the whole suite of things being together to actually help our community. That's the crucial thing about that. The other bit, the phasing of it, I would think because of the last 12 months and certainly the last 6 to 9 months, things and importances have changed. So how we maximize the rest of the area might have changed just in the makeup of what the community needs now. But one thing for sure, it does need health and welfare. I'm not going to call it a swimming pool because it's not. The whole point of building that there was about health and well-being, so that somebody can go and see a doctor, and if they need something, they can actually get it in a one-stop shop a bit like we've done at the Borough Council, actually, where we've got DWP and all the other facilities all under one roof. It is a very clear opportunity for Boston, and I think that bit side, that's really what we need to make happen. So I'll leave that with you.
It looks like Neil's frozen, if you pardon the metaphor. It seems to me that where we're sort of reaching towards is to think about the scope for the Mayflower Center in its current form to encompass, apart from perhaps the swimming pool, some of the other elements that would have been in this part of the PE21 offer, to see if we can put together a bringing together of the two projects within one envelope. And I mean that's only my interpretation, but it would be just quite interesting to get Claire's take on the scope for being a bit flexible around all of that, subject of course to a bit more information from the costing work that's been commissioned by the Strategic Alliance through the consultants.
Yes, thanks, Ivan. I have to say, when I very first saw these projects on the table, I got a bit excited about having my own pool, but that was purely from a personal perspective. But I think the issue with the pool, as we all know, is that it's a very expensive thing to run. So it was mooted at one point whether we could do that in conjunction with the council maintaining that. So that's still a possibility. I guess the other thing is to have a look to whether we could reduce the proposition of the Mayflower building, to reduce it back. I think that brings with it its own problems. It is kind of an encompassing building that includes the curriculum areas that will facilitate the front face stuff. So, but that is another possibility. But I'm certainly not averse to looking at the other things. I probably haven't been as involved in the PE21 to know what it was that we could include.
To me, superficially, I could see, quite a compelling opportunity to bring some of this into one envelope instead of thinking of two projects that have got to be sequenced or the funding cut in half. Some creative, because what's at the heart of the Mayflower Centre speaks to the points that Councillor Skinner raises around health and well-being potentially. And certainly a dialogue with Jackie about some of the aspirations that are linked into the health agenda in relation to all of that would be really interesting. It's just a bit of a shame that we're coming to this at the 11th hour. It's nobody's fault. It's just the way it's all played out. But I would get the feeling, as the eternal optimist, that there might still be an opportunity to square the circle on all of this if we can get moving quickly. Michelle's always very optimistic, so I wonder just what her view might be as well.
Thank you, Ivan. I think it's about honing in on the offer, isn't it? What is it? What's the ask? Sorry, not the offer. What's the ask in terms of the output and the impact on the community? Because that takes us right back to what's the purpose of the town deal? What are we seeking to fix? And why are we seeking to fix it? And how are we going to seek to fix it? So I think actually it's probably worth a conversation offline between Claire and Jackie and Lydia and obviously myself there, in terms of what could we do? What would that look like? I think it is 11th hour, and I would be concerned that we don't want to create something that's fundamentally different in terms of that business case 12-month development, but that has to be balanced with something that's affordable and that we can get the relevant external funding for as well to match fund any ask of the town deal. So I think on the optimistic side, I think it's worth that conversation outside here. We'll take that offline and report back to board, either as an email update, so the board have got that update before the next meeting, or something that changes the project appraisal ready for that final sign off of the tip.
Thank you, Michelle, and apologies, my internet connection is drifting in and out, so I did miss some slight elements of that, so apologies for that. But I think we maybe need to do is just give some direction from the board in terms of sort of where we are. I'm very conscious we're sort of looking towards the end of October in terms of putting the town investment plan forward, and we need to have a sort of clear guidance to how we're going to take things forward before, you know, the next board meeting on the 16th. It seems to me, and unless anybody's got any other sort of queries to raise, that we have which are totaling around £10 million and have gone through the proper process through the technical subgroup, and are broadly being supported by that technical subgroup, and probably need the more formal sort of approval of the board. We've then got the Boston Mayflower, the Mayflower Center, sorry, and the PE21 project with a sort of combined, if there's a combined ask of 15 million for those, if that's sort of strategically a way forward in terms of trying to come up with an overall 25 million pounds funding package, then we can task the team to go away and talk within the PE21 and the Mayflower Center projects to conclude whether that's, you know, deliverable and workable within the timeframes that we're giving them. I don't know whether, I know Jackie's got a hand up, but I don't know whether anybody else has got any comments on that. I'll hand over to Jackie and then open the floor up again.
Thank you, Neil. It's really just to say that, yes, of course, we're always happy to engage with Claire and others around things, but the practices that we are working with are located in the PE21 area, and we need to be very mindful that we are looking at patients and where they're currently registered. So we just need to make sure that if we are looking at how we do change services, that we recognise that none of this is in the public domain at the moment around GP practices. It's all aspirational. So we need to be careful what we're saying, but also we must, you know, part of the PE21 was doing that gateway into Boston and, you know, the NHS as anchor institutions. So as part of those conversations, I think it's going back to what Michelle said as to what are we trying to achieve, and what both the councillors have alluded to as to what's our aspirations for Boston, and how does any funding from this fund, along with potentially other funds, enable that to happen.
Jackie, anybody got any other comments to make on the issues that have been raised? I can't see any hands. I think, as I say, it's maybe important that we give some direction now to the team ahead of the next board meeting on the 16th. So is there a broad consensus within the board that we task the team to look at those two projects with an overall ask of 15 million, with the remaining projects within the suite of projects that have been outlined in the reports, totaling 10 million pounds, with a view that we can bring those more detailed report on the outcome of that to the next board meeting on the 16th of October. Is everybody, maybe if we could have a show of hands, who's in favour of that? Is there anybody against? Hopefully without a delay in timing. Okay, I think that's broadly a broad consensus then. That's the sort of plan of action I think that we need to take. We can come back with a detailed report which makes it firm when the board sort of finally signs off the tip exactly what is being funded, but with a broad outline that there's a suite of projects of around 10 million pounds that are within the reports contained therein, and we will task the team to conclude how we bring together the PE21 and the Mayflower Center projects with the remaining 25 million of the bid. Okay. If nobody's got anything else on that, I think the next item on the agenda is the social value charter, and I think there's a short report that Ivan produced on that. Ivan?
Yes, it's short and to the point, hopefully. Because the Towns Fund doesn't end in 31st of October or 30th of October when we submit our bid. It will then run for a period of a year's negotiation, then potentially a further 5 years. And what we've been thinking about here is how we make sure the community's properly able to influence and monitor the thing. And obviously, you know, the local authority and other statutory agencies can speak for and represent elements of the community. But there was this excellent report developed by a think tank, a local government flavoured think tank called Localis, that came up with the idea of actually establishing charters, which for really important bits of work were shared with the community and created an opportunity for them to, first of all, be aware of what projects like this were seeking to achieve, but then establish a reporting framework to them that engages them in just seeing how they're progressing. And that was about thinking not just about a kind of a linear process of saying, you know, we're going to lay so many bricks and we're going to have so many learners, but actually working with some representatives of the community to work up a broader assessment of the value to society of these developments. And we've done a bit of work around that, myself in conjunction with the University of Lincoln, looking at another project in Boston called Inclusive Boston. People like David Fannin have been heavily involved in that, with the college and others. And we thought it would be a really good idea to set something like this up. It would also make our bid a bit more distinctive and interesting, but also we thought it would be a good idea to do it in partnership with another area, so we could do some compare and contrast. And through some networking we've done, we've identified that Gould, which is a bit like Boston, would be a good benchmark organisation. It's sufficiently far away that we're in a different geography, and it's also, its bid is going in January rather than October. But we had an exploratory discussion with East Riding of Yorkshire Council, who were the organisation responsible for that bid. And one of the portfolio holders from there joined us for that discussion, and there was Michelle, but we invited also David from a CBS perspective and Claire from a learning perspective to join us. And I think we got quite excited about the possibility to establish this. And the proposal that David's put in, that's a very modest proposal for a little bit of revenue funding from the Towns Fund to provide an ambassador facility for young people particularly, we felt could be stretched slightly, not significantly, a few £1,000s, to enable this to be established as part of the implementation process. And so as long as nobody on the board particularly resiles from this as an idea, we were going to start working it up to go into the bid, and then subject to the success of the bid, we were going to reach out and start to get local people engaged a bit more in seeing what's happening, because I think you know that there is this tricky issue at the nub of where we are at the moment, but I'd back us as a group to resolve that. Once we've got a very compelling bid, it'll be one of the most exciting things in regeneration funding terms that's been invested in Boston for a long time. And I think, you know, there are enough people and enough organisations who are cynical in this world that actually having a process like this of engaging people positively would just be a really nice antidote to some of that. And so we felt it would structurally bind people, and it would give us something distinctive, and it would help make sure that we've got that as a key component of our delivery for the next 5 years. I don't know if Michelle wanted to say anything, because she participated in a seminar, a UK-wide seminar, in fact, which also involved somebody who crept in from Australia, but that's another story, to talk about this whole notion. And I think Michelle, in addition to me, feels it could be a really good thing to do.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, Neil. Yes, I do. I think it's a really positive path to take and course of action to take. And some of that is around, I go back to the piece of work that Ivan did for the Borough Council, which evaluated the impact of social value on the migration funding that the Borough Council was successful in being awarded. And through a piece of work that Ivan, a comprehensive and complex piece of work, I should say, Ivan was able to calculate that for every £1 of investment through the migration fund, it equated to £5 of social value within the community. And there's something really powerful about that, because it goes beyond just the obvious black and white outcomes as well. And it really demonstrates where the value of projects and the value of interventions can be woven all the way into the fabric of society. And I think that when we look at some of the challenges that Boston faces in terms of its comparison with neighbouring councils, you know, its other 9 neighbouring authorities within its group of comparators, and when you look at some of our national statistics for, I looked to Jackie for the health outcomes, but also our skills outcomes, and then that general economic activity, there is something that would be powerful to being able to demonstrate to the community that some of these projects aren't just, for want of a bigger word, strategic and don't impact their daily lives, but they're able to influence and say from the development of these, as we go into the next stage of the business case development, how they would expect to see a positive outcome, where they would want to be involved, or how that could be equated. And I think, because we keep saying, and we've said for a long time, the Towns Fund isn't just about getting to the 30th of October. It's not just about the next 12 months of business case delivery, and it's not just about the lifetime of this current Parliament. It's about the impact on the area for the next 30 years. And having something such as the Social Value Charter really enables us to take our whole communities with us on that 30-year journey, to be able to look back and say, at strategic points of there, not wait 30 years, obviously, but at key milestones, look back and say, so what is being delivered? How has that impacted? And again, when we come back to the ethos of the Towns Fund being for our communities, and that becomes again another really powerful reason for looking to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, for that. Yeah, I think it's really interesting that some of the initial feedback we got on the tip was to sort of emphasise the inclusivity, isn't it, and the community aspects of our bid, which I know we'd almost tried to suppress it slightly, because we didn't feel or didn't think that was what was wanted to be seen, but that's obviously not the case. And I think building on the stuff that, all the work that we did with My Town right at the outset, you know, this could be or needs to be seen as a crucial part of the town deal work going forward. So I'm fully supportive of it in that respect. David has got his hand up, so I'll pass over to David.
Thanks. So just backing up what Ivan and Michelle were saying there's a strong, very strong thread between activity that raises social mobility and access to learning through to hard economic outcomes, and it's measured through the social value measures that we've been using on some of the projects in Boston. It's at one level very simple. Following that through is complex, and that's where Ivan's coming from in terms of what's been included into the inclusive growth part of the tip. But that is such a strong thread for those ambitions to lift up Boston's performance against the national comparators, and it's a long-term thing. Thank you.
David, has anybody else got any comments with regard to the Social Value Charter? And in broad terms, is everybody happy that we progress with that as a sort of fundamental part of the town deal work going forward? There's broad agreement there. Nobody objecting to that at all? Good. But then we'll carry on with that work as we take matters forward. I think we're on to any other business now. I'm not sure. I've not had anything. I don't know whether Louisa had any other business from anybody.
No, I've not had any. Thanks, Neil.
Has anybody got anything else that they wish to raise?
Yes, sorry, Neil. I wanted to flag something if no one else has, or at the end of when anyone else has.
really like the last word. So is anybody else wanting to come in? Lydia, I'll let you have a go first then.
Sorry, can I just add that we have taken forward kind of a proactive approach to our communications and marketing, and to thank those of you on the board that have already provided a snapshot to camera from our agency that we're working with. You will start to see that reflected from this week in our communications via our website, on social media. So some of you have already been interviewed, and we've also interviewed some members of the public and community representatives as well. And I'll also pick up following the last item of how we reflect that social value as well going forward. And that's not just for these next couple of weeks before bid submission, but really picking up on that ongoing communication and engagement post bid submission. Thank you.
I think I was on mute there, sorry. Can everybody hear me?
It's Mick Lazarus from HLG. Would it be helpful if I give a very brief overview of where we are in the process in terms of the assessment, and maybe some, again, very brief reflections from cohort 1?
Yes, if you would like to do that, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
No problem. So we've now concluded the moderation and the assessment of all the 14 towns that came forward in cohort 1. We've now got advice currently with ministers on next steps, but what we know that they've indicated they want to move quite quickly. So subject to their agreement, we are looking to agree formal terms, heads of terms offers in the next couple of weeks with all 13 towns. So that's good news. As things stand, towns are likely to come out with a funding envelope. Ministers are keen to announce projects as part of the heads of terms. So that is quite important, given we've already touched on sort of scalability and deliverability of projects in this meeting already. So that absolutely should be looked at moving forward, in addition to sort of prioritising as well. So please do note that. In terms of reflections from cohort 1, I think in the main we found that the quality was good. However, there were some common areas where I think towns probably could have done better and paid more attention to. For example, the biggest issue was gaps in the evidence base. And as a result, the level of need wasn't fully demonstrated in a number of tips. Certainly the ones I assessed, there was data being included, but there was no comparative to national averages. And actually, in some instances, the data is actually contradictory. I know Michelle's talked about this already in terms of how it's made work in terms of the Mayflowers. I think, again, don't neglect that evidence base. And again, you've touched on the sort of importance of community engagement. Yes, I won't go further on that. But again, I think the social charter is not social value charter is not something I've seen in the tips coming forward in cohort 1. So I think that's really valuable. Actually, I think that would be a huge asset actually moving forward. And one thing we really struggle with actually in the assessment is on cost comparison. Given we're not expecting full business cases to come forward as part of the tip submission, we find it really hard to assess individual interventions. So I think it'd be really helpful when you submit, if you can highlight where you've done some work looking at value for money. That will obviously help you and also help us actually when we do our assessment. And one further reflection is we struggle again to assess full revenue cost of projects. They didn't score particularly well, mostly as a result of not aligning with the intervention framework, but also with not having strong outputs and outcomes. So if you are intending to put revenue cost forward, my steer would be to do so aligned to individual capital ask rather than individual revenue ask. So again, it's just something reflecting on that assessment from 1. And just on some positive news you've touched on already, but you'll note that the accelerated funding proposals for Boston were successful. Letters have been sent out, and payment should be in your bank accounts now. If not, they should be very soon. So yeah, I'll pause there. Any questions? I'm happy to answer.
Thank you for that, Mick. That's really useful. Has anybody got any questions whilst we've got Mick here at all? I don't think there are. I mean, that's really useful feedback. We'll obviously work on that as we seek to finalise the bid, by the end of this month. Okay, if nobody else has got any other business, then I'm going to pass to Michelle.
Thank you, Neil. I'll just pause in case anyone comes in. Oh, okay. Really, it's the last thing is around support. So one of those of you who may remember when we were preparing for the future High Street bid, something that was important was letters of support. And I think this is back to, we come back to the consultation with our various sectors. But actually, some of the projects that we've identified, the interventions, have a real significance on our business community, and particularly on some of you here today with your as board members, but coming from organisations that sit within Boston, operate within Boston, or have connections to Boston. And I think Lydia and I will be in touch in the next week, actually, to ask you to consider, when you look at the level of interventions, how do you see that having an impact on your own business and on the business community in terms of that broader aspect? Because, you know, one of our bid is very much Claire, Lydia and I were trying to come up with what is it, what is our bid? And I think this comes back to some of the feedback around the USP and the personality of the bid. And actually, if you think about it, it is very, very, we've got the port that looks to the heritage, that looks to the future of the impact of the business, the economy of the South East Lincolnshire as a result of port activity. And underpinning amongst all of that is something around the skills. So it's actually a very technical, if we were going back 150 years ago, we might say industrial, actually a bit longer than that, my history's poor there, an industrial type offer in terms of what is its purpose, what are we seeking to unlock? And when we look at the impact of what's being proposed in terms of interventions, there is something around, as we keep saying, we talk about having healthy communities so that they are more fit for work, to be economically more active, a higher skilled workforce, so that enables businesses to grow, expand and attract inward investment, creating pride of place so that people want to live here, thrive in the area, and again act as a magnet to attract more investment in. And there's something around that Lydia and I would like you to reflect on from your own organisations and the way that you've been involved in some of these projects, around what it means to your organisations for the town deal to be successful. You know, what will be the impact? I suppose it's the classic, so what? You know, so what if Boston is successful and bear with me, Mick and Pete, is able to secure all up to 25 million of investment for all of the projects. So what does that do? Because and I think it's Lydia and I would really like to capture some of that, because we think it's important that government and in terms of the assessing aren't just hearing from our tip. And we've got some very precise, as Lydia has referred to, communication and consultation feedback that we've got. But this is just something else that is another layer that would be really helpful to think about. So if you're not sure, I said but start thinking about it, and we'll be in touch to discuss what that might look like. And that was it. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Michelle. If there's no other comments, nobody's raising their hand, I'd like to thank everybody for their time. There will be another board meeting, as I say, on the 16th, when we'll look to finalise and sign off the tip from the board's perspective. So thank you very much, everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone. Bye.